Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And while I am not an expert on Persian cuisine, I do consider myself a cookbook connoisseur. Before I had a husband, I slept with a stack of cookbooks in my bed every night and poured through them. And I have not put yours down since it arrived at my doorstep last week. It is absolutely beautiful. And I think what you've done is so special because you combine food and show how it is art in much the same way that art expresses things that we don't have the words to say. This book does that with food, with culture, with expressing these emotions. So thank you so much for bringing this book into our lives. So I'd like to start by asking you, Leila, in your book you say that your mother, Nahid-Jun, celebrated Persian culture and in cuisine and culture in every aspect of her life. Feasting and celebration is, of course, central to this book and to Persian culinary tradition. What does feasting mean to you and to your family?
Well, Persian food is the essence of feasting. It is abundant. It is for all to enjoy a great meal together. Oh, sorry. Feasting is about family, friends, and everyone gathering together to eat and enjoy abundant food. And that is really the key essence of Persian food because it's not made for one person or two people. It's made for an abundance of guests or family members and all gathered together, and it's an abundance and spread of various and many dishes. There are two things I want to refer to. One night, my son Philip told my mother he's coming for dinner, and she asked, "What would you like to eat?" And he said, "A hamburger. Your hamburgers are fabulous." She added her special blend of spices as well as a lot of cumin in it, and he loved it. He arrives and there are 13 hamburgers on the table. And he said, Nana, I thought we were going to have a tete-a-tete. Who else is coming? She said, nobody. He said, well, why did you cook 13 hamburgers? And she said, well, I don't know how to cook for one person. Which is so true. And the other thing is that if you go to any Persian village, even in this day, and there's a villager who really works hard, struggles, and does not have the money to do a feast. If a foreigner comes that is not part of the village, and they see that there's someone unknown there, they invite them to their home for dinner. They don't eat themselves or their children, feed them. They spend every a bit of money they have to make sure there is a sofre, which means a tablecloth on the floor or on their table, and there is abundant food at that meal. So that is very difficult to express and explain, but this is feasting. And it goes to the courts of Shah Abbas, where Massumeh will get into, where feasting was at its height. The Portuguese ambassador wrote a book on Persian feasting in the courts of Shah Abbas in the 16th century. He was, we're talking about the 16th century when he wrote this book. And, or in the courts of the Sasanians in Persepolis, Cyrus the Great, you see, even though Alexander the Great burned Persepolis, there's enough left to see the amazing art that is left behind that shows feasting. And this is 2,500 years ago that, people carrying huge trays of food and libation and wines. So technically, every Persian meal is a feast. Like when I cook and I have a few people over, it's not just a first course, a second course, and dessert. It is like maybe 5, 6 appetizers, maybe 8, 9, 10 main courses, and maybe 3, 4, 5 desserts.
Well, having attended one of your feasts at the Gallery, I can definitely attest to that. Absolutely.
And that is the beauty, it's like cooking in Persian culture is an art. It's love. It's not considered as just cooking to satisfy your hunger. It is to celebrate. So that is where the word feasting really comes from. I mean, although feast, it comes from festa in Latin, but this is where Persian food best portrays itself.
Amazing. I'd love to dive into you with Andy. Some of the ingredients. What are the hallmarks of Persian cuisine? Take us through some of the special.
I can't wait to hear for some of you to agree with me and disagree with me. The hallmark ingredients for Iranian cuisine. Well, one, I think, people part of the community, we have a good sense of it. People outside of that community who are non-Iranians, they probably think it's a cuisine that is heavily spiced or spicy, or it's similar to countries surrounding Iran. It's similar to Indian cuisine. But I think what makes Iranian cuisine so distinct is that it's quite mild. It's actually quite delicate. I would say herbs are obviously a huge thing. I think of fresh herbs, but also dried ones like dried fenugreek leaves. I think of Iran as being like the country loving sour ingredients. Really, I think of Thailand as well, but like when you think of Iran, I think of dried limes, I think of barberries, I think of pomegranates, I think of verjus, I think of unripened grapes. All these kind of ingredients are added to dips, stews, rices, because we love that kind of acidity. I think floral flavors. I think obviously rose water is a huge part of our desserts, actually both sweet and savory. And turmeric. Turmeric is definitely, I'd say turmeric is, and saffron, to round it out, I would say cardamom. Like those are the three spices to me. I mean, there are many others that we use, but it's all used very kind of delicately. It's never aggressively flavored. There are variations depending on which household you go to on how you make a particular dish, but there's a kind of freshness and a understanding and balance when it comes to flavors and dishes.
That's wonderful. And Dr. Farhad, Leila touched on this a little bit, but some of the art that depicts the feasting, can you tell us a little bit about that history and the artworks from the country and how it reflects how important this is to the culture?
Yes, I mean, even before, Persian art, when you go back to the Iron Age and look at those beautiful pots that still exist with these incredible animal heads, and it tells you that food and feasting was not just for eating, but it also had a visual aspect to it. And as Leila mentioned, it continued. There are images of feasting all over the walls, certainly, or people taking trays in Pasargade, and it continues. Food plays a really important part in the arts. Some of the earliest, for instance, plates that we have really sort of refer to food and refer to eating. So food is represented indirectly in the dishes that exist, as well as actually the etiquette that goes with eating and the whole idea of feasting. For instance, there's a wonderful 10th century bowl that has an inscription on it that says, basically, think before you speak. So here you are, you have this bowl, and there's this inscription around it. So clearly, this tells you how to behave at a feast. So if you don't have anything important to say, don't say it. Listen, and when you have something important, then say it. We have, from the Safavid period, we have, again, bowls and dishes that are inscribed with sayings like, enjoy the soup, or, enjoy the rice in this bowl. So again, it shows you the importance of feasting and the importance of food, even on the dishes that are used to serve it. So food and feasting has always been implied in works of art from the very as early as we know, and then of course after the 16th century you have representations of royal feasts with the ruler sitting and with the sofre in front of him and people cooking and the guests enjoying Persian food.
Amazing. Leila, there's actually an artwork, a fresco that's mentioned in the book that was in your family's palace in Iran. Can you talk to us a little bit about the meaning of that, what it brings to your life, the culture that's represented there?
This was a family home. It was like a small, it was not that small, but it was in Maku, which is on the northern border of Iran in Azerbaijan. My family comes from Azerbaijan on my mother's side and from Uzbekistan from my father's side in Russia before the Bolsheviks came. So in Maku, which is the border, my ancestors protected the border of Azerbaijan, and they had a 3,000-person army. They were asked by the government to protect our borders from the Ottoman Empire and from Russia. This palace was built as an inspiration by one of my ancestors who went hunting always with the Tsar Nikolai. Oh, sorry, sorry. One of my ancestors. Sorry, I couldn't be wired somehow because my dress was too long. So I'm the only one who has to hold this, and I forget. So, so he hunted with Tsar Nikolai, and he at his St. Petersburg's hunting palace. He loved that, which was a Russian architecture. And he told so to the Tsar, and the Tsar sent 40 architects and builders to Maku to build him this home, which was a mini, sort of looked like that palace, but it was Iranian craftsmen with Russian craftsmen who made it. When I was a kid, I would go on the roof, and I remember I could see Turkey and Russia because that was how close it was. Hence why Maku became a crossroads for Armenians, Turks, Russians, and Iranians. All together, a lot of it was the Bakhchajur Palace. So part of the word is Armenian, part of it is Turkish. So Bakhcha means a little garden, and Jur means palace. So they called it that. I don't know whether it was really a palace, but now it is a national trust in Iran, and it is visited by many, per my son who Googles and says this many visitors came today. In any case, we donated it to the state in 1974. And so in the dining room of this palace represents the Treaty of Gulistan, which was signed there. And so it commemorates the Treaty of Gulistan. Could we have the slide of this ceiling? Anyhow, so on one side are
Just keep speaking, I'll let you know when they get to it.
Oh, okay. Well, I wanted to show it in a way. The Treaty of Gulistan was Russia wanted to take over all of Azerbaijan because they had a bigger army, and at the time, during the Qajar period, the Shah's sort of like things fell apart a bit in the central government, and so the 3,000 army could not really fight. But my ancestor was a good negotiator who said that you cannot take over this part of Azerbaijan since we control it. Mm-hmm. And so they came to an understanding, and so Iran kept 2/3 of Azerbaijan, and then 1/3 went to Russia, even though they won the war. And so the Treaty of Gulistan was signed in this palace. And on one side are the Russians eating, and it shows a table with wine goblets and fruits and vegetables and dishes that are all in silverware, and women and men are sitting around this table. And then on the other side are the Persians, who are the Azeris, who are sitting, and Azerbaijanis, and they are mostly men, and I mean, they're all men, and then they're sitting around a sofre, and they're eating mounds of Persian food, rices, stews, and the borders of, I don't know what's happening here. It was supposed to be here. And around the borders of this fresco are fruits and vegetables from the villages surrounding Maku, which belong to the family. And Azerbaijan was one of the most wealthiest of states in Iran that had the most agriculture. So there was an abundance of fruits and vegetables that shows the bounty that were collected from these villages around, that were seasonal to that time, around the fresco.
And so important that the food was.
It's an important historical moment in Iran's history. And then also showing East and West, which is all about, this book is all about East and West. My mother always, even though she never went back to Iran after revolution, she would travel to many markets in all over the world, from Munich to Nice to Istanbul to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, all over the place looking for spices, herbs, and different dried fruits. So it's not a greatest picture, since obviously I can't go to Iran and take a high-res image, but this is from Roloff Beni's book on Persia that was done before the revolution. So it sort of manifests a very incredible historical moment, but also manifests feasting. So there we go. And you see all the abundance of fruits and vegetables around the tables that are on the ceiling, that are painted on the ceiling. Gourds and zucchini and all sorts of grapes and fruits. And my mom's home was like this. That's the way she would receive you. That's the way she would, for her, everything was about beauty and abundance. It wasn't, Persian cooking is not just about the taste of the food itself, but it's about the way you decorate it and garnish it. And I must say, I learned from Katie Scissorhands, the stylist who worked with Nico Shinko, to make these amazing pictures, how to even do it better. Because she gave me a tweezer this long that I could then individually put the little slivers of pistachios.
I don't think that's how your mom was doing it.
No, but it became even more sophisticated.
Yeah. Well, I love that the book really shows that it's about feasting. It's about bringing people into the home. This isn't a cuisine that you usually will go out to a restaurant and have. It's very much about in the home. And so, Andy, I'm interested to hear from you. Like, there are a lot of misconceptions, or people don't know that much that aren't a part of the culture. What are some of the misconceptions, and what do you wish that more people knew?
Oh my God, how long do we have?
I'll cut you off.
Well, I touched that on a little bit earlier. It's like, I think people it's not a cuisine. The one thing I'll say on a positive note, I do think Iranian cuisine in the last, from what I'm seeing, I'm from California, but I've lived in New York the last 17 years. You are seeing Iranian cuisine becoming more present. Iranian restaurants, certainly Iranian cookbooks, Iranian people within the food industry. So I'm very happy that our culture and our cuisine is getting some light. I would say, people might think that it's, again, heavily spiced or that it's heavy. I think something that happens with a lot of cuisines, especially non-Western cuisines, is that a lack of understanding of regionality. You know, we're able to kind of talk about Sicilian food, Ligurian food, or we go into Andalusian food in Spain or Catalan, and we don't do that with a lot of other, you know, non-Western countries. And so I think what I hope is that there's a kind of, not just with Iranian cuisine, but with other cuisines, there's a push and a desire for having a deeper understanding for the and appreciation for those different dishes from those different regions. I think what's good news, this happened this week. A restaurant, an Iranian restaurant in LA was named one of the 20 best new restaurants in the country. I don't know if anybody knows that, but it just came out this past week. Bon Appetit magazine published that, and it's a restaurant called Azizam, which a lot of
Love that. Chérie, my love.
Oh.
And to think that an Iranian restaurant would even not that it would even get that kind of spotlight. Like I have never really had seen a restaurant receive that kind of light until maybe 7 years ago when, maybe has it been 7 years ago? When Sofra came out in Brooklyn, which I hope all of you have been to, and encourage you to go. And what I'm very excited to see is that a lot of Iranian restaurants that are opening up, they're going beyond the kind of kebab houses. They're really kind of pushing and showcasing the dishes that we love and we make at home. You know, the stews and the soups, the khoreshes, the ashes, which I believe are the backbone of the cuisine, you know. So.
That's great. And Dr. Farhad, you, Leila had mentioned before something about the tweezers, but also the platters, the bowls, the dishes, the way things are shown. And I know a lot of that goes back to the royal courts. Can you tell us about the history of that and how it's not just the ingredients and the dish, it's really the whole package?
Yes, absolutely. And it's sort of interesting what you raise about the cuisine now, and you sort of see the origins and the history of it. Because again, the ingredients that you mentioned are the ingredients that are mentioned in cookbooks. We have a cookbook from the 16th century and a cookbook from the 17th century, and those are really our sort of amazing sources of cooking of that period. And in them, they mention all the ingredients that you mentioned as well, but also how you actually put things together. So, for instance, you know, you put white rice on a blue dish, and you put saffron on it. And in fact, there's a plate that says when you see saffron rice on a blue dish, reminds you of the sun and the sky. So these elements are not only, you know, carefully described, but also how you present them is really important. And in fact, it's almost as important as the cooking. I mean, sometimes the cooking gets a little vague, and you sort of don't know actually how to do something. But then these two cooks go into incredible detail about the presentation of the food. And, you know, as you said, sort of the nuts go next to the raisins, and the raisin goes next to the pistachio, and you know, and you do them in rows, and then you put rice on it, and then you put a different kind of rice. So it's, you know, how you perceive the food is as important as how it tastes and how the aroma of it. So again, it's sort of this combination of all the senses that Persian food is supposed to evoke and inspire.
That feasting with the eye
Yes,
first.
absolutely.
And Leila, what about you? And, you know, it's not just about Persian cuisine. You really have an international focus. You're looking beyond that. How do you think that that combines with Persian cuisine? How do you do that in your own home, bringing in some other flavors and other ideas?
Well, I think that it was my mother who started doing that, like from our travels. She would pick up this berry, that herb, that spice, and one of the important recipes in this book is her blend of spices. That
Okay.
literally, even since she's passed away, my aunties, my mom's friends call me and say, I just ran out of the last teaspoon of your mom's. I said, well, it's in our cookbook. I'll make it for you. And I do make it. And my mom used to make it and put it in jars and send it to her best friends as presents or just give it to them. Or even as holidays, she would make jams for them and all sorts of torshi, which is the fermented vegetables, and the chutneys. But this was her famous thing, her spices. That was a mixture of cinnamon and turmeric and the rose petals and cumin. I mean, it's just cardamom, and it's delicious. I almost use it in every recipe, almost, not in every. It's so funny because when one of my testers, Farnak Amirsa, they called me and said, the only comment I have about, because we asked a few friends to test, the comment I have is that the dish almost tastes the same. Then I realized that the 10 recipes she was assigned to all had these spices in there. But no, there's not in every dish, but we use it abundantly.
And was that the secret to the burgers too?
Secret to the burgers too.
Okay.
Yes.
Advia.
Advia. But this is her own blend, and I'll have to give you some, by the way.
I would love to.
So, in any case, it's funny because the other day I was with Emily introduced me to a writer for the New York Times, and she asked if she could have some, and I gave her a little bit, and she said, I spread it on my fried eggs. It was delicious. I never thought of it that way.
Right?
But it can work anywhere, honestly. It can be a good blend anywhere. So, my mom, I was just telling Andy before we started that, 45 years ago when she moved here, there was no kashk. Kashk is a kind of whey that we use in our eggplant dips, which is kashk badem jun. And so my mom started putting chèvre cheese because she couldn't find kashk. Now you can order kashk on Amazon. But those days, she had to be inventive.
Right.
So a lot of her dishes have that in it. So I've given the option of kashk or chèvre in her eggplant dip.
Which is a very, very smart alternative. The idea of using goat cheese, which has this tangy, funky, different consistency, but it makes total sense to use as an alternative.
So I would say that my mom traveled everywhere with my 2 sons and me after my father died. So the first place we would go were the food markets and the spice markets. And, everywhere from Jamaica to Istanbul to everywhere, and every time I would go to India, she would say, you have to bring me those Indian spices. They're the freshest I've ever had. And my daughter-in-law, Farah's mother, Simin, would take me to these spice markets, and we would buy tons of. I always come back from Dubai with a suitcase of spices and herbs, and I'm always shivering that at the border, the dogs, when they come near me, but then they open them. I mean, not always, but sometimes they've opened and they see they're packaged nicely with labels, and they're dry, so it's not like I'm bringing something. But I'm always scared crossing the borders.
It's interesting that cuisine is so much about tradition, but it's also making use of what you have or what's available to you, and then kind of always evolving that with your own, what you're exposed to. I'm interested to hear from Andy, what's happening in Persian cuisine now? What are some of the forward-thinking takes on traditional things? What have you seen that's really
That's a
interesting?
big question. Well, I'm first-generation American. I was born in the Bay Area in Berkeley, California. My parents came here just before the revolution. So obviously they brought those kind of flavors, those dishes, those memories to the States, like so many of us here. I think, as a cook, as a food writer, as someone who worked in restaurants and has worked in food media, I think, my goal is, when it comes to Iranian cuisine, is to get people both Iranian and non-Iranian to have a better understanding of the cuisine. And something that I've realized, it's actually a very simple thing. People, even if you're not an avid cook, people will likely try a new ingredient, but they'll only try a new ingredient if there's not too many steps to the recipe. And on the flip side, they will try a new technique as long as there's not a long ingredient list. So you kind of have to pick or choose. So that's what I always think of when I'm developing a recipe. Now, when it comes to Iranian cuisine and introducing that to people, because I do find it is part of my job and a deep desire of not only who I am, but my job as a cook and a writer, I want to think of those dishes and present them in a way that people can actually make at home. You know, there's a lot of arguments of how you make dishes in Iranian cuisines, and people can't always agree, and it's not necessarily streamlined. And I think so many of us have asked our family members, our mothers, grandmothers, fathers, grandfathers, aunts, uncles, and they don't give us an actual proper recipe. And so I think my goal was I want to, write recipes that people are really able to kind of make and have a deep understanding, but then also empower them to use these ingredients or use these techniques to kind of try it in other ways. So yes, make the Persian rice and learn how to make Persian rice. But if you don't have dill or fava beans to make bagali polo, throw in chickpeas and parsley and see what happens. But you have an understanding of how to make our rice. So it's not that I'm telling them to call that bagali polo, but it's this understanding to encourage people to try this, and hopefully in the end they'll have a deeper understanding of appreciation of our cuisine. I think Iran is a very misunderstood country, for many for many years now, and I think a result of that is that cuisine is misunderstood, and I think a really easy way to kind of change people's perception and have a better understanding of the people is through the food. So that's my goal, is if they could have a better understanding of those flavors, those techniques, those dishes, then hopefully they'll change their perspective about the people in the country at large.
It's interesting that you're talking about outside perceptions versus inside perceptions, because I wanted to ask Dr. Farhad about, as Europeans started traveling to Iran, what kind of historical accounts were there from the outside looking at the cuisine, and what were those first takes of,
It's fascinating. First of all, the sort of the inside view. Again, we have these cookbooks, and as you suggest, for instance, in one recipe it says, you can use chicken, but if you don't use chicken, you can use duck or something else. So it gives you alternatives, and also, for instance,
is it chicken though, or is it like peacock?
right?
No, it's chicken. But also, for instance, you mentioned you sort of don't know how to do a certain thing. It's really interesting. In this one passage, it says, this is a recipe for cuckoo. And then he says, it's just too complicated for the reader and for the writer to give you the full recipe. So I'm going to move on. So he mentions cuckoo, he mentions it's very good, but he's not going to give you the recipe. So clearly, whoever had access to that cookbook had to go and ask a cousin or a mother or somebody else. So again, sort of history repeats itself. So to your question, so we have from the Safavid period, from the 16th and 17th century, we have a lot of foreigners going to Iran, and of course having a grand reception, a feast was sort of part of being received, and these travelers go into minute details about these events. Again, it was there were no tables, and there were no actual dining rooms per se. So dining could take place anywhere where there was the soufre, as you mentioned, so you would put it out, and then the various dishes were brought. And apparently, at least in the 16th and 17th century, you would start with something sweet. And that really puzzled the Europeans, because they were not used to starting with something sweet. But they had no choice, and so they had to eat whatever was given them. And they would come in relatively small dishes, and you basically ate what was put in front of you. So you couldn't really reach, even if the other polo looked really nice. You sort of had to eat what was in front of you. And there were 4 or 5 different courses, and for each course they would pick up the soufre, the table, and they would, which is basically the tablecloth, and they would put another one with more dishes and more fruit and other edibles. And drinking was only done between meals. You didn't actually drink while you ate. And of course there was wine, and Europeans were waiting for wine, but it was up to the ruler, to the Shah, whether he was going to serve wine or not. And apparently when there was wine, the meal would go on for hours. When there wasn't wine, it tended to be shorter. And the wine was only served during courses. So you didn't eat and drink at the same time. While you were eating, you had pleasant conversation. And then they would take things away, and then you would have your drinks. So, and then of course they also describe some of the dishes, but they didn't know how it was made. They would just say, there was rice, or there were like 5 different kinds of rice. One was yellow, one was white, one was, But, and then so it's very useful to have the cookbooks, because then the cookbooks tell you what some of those dishes
So you can piece it all together.
Yes, you can piece it all together. And that's what we do as historians and art historians. It makes us happy when you can piece everything together. But the etiquette of feasting was very important and very clearly prescribed. I mean, there are accounts from the 11th century sort of telling you exactly how to eat, what to eat. For instance, you're not supposed to blow on your food. You're supposed to eat in small morsels. You're not supposed to reach out, and everything is passed from towards your right. So all of this sort of state. There are even instructions how to pick your teeth after a meal. So it really goes down to sort of immense detail.
That's fascinating. Okay, now I'm going to get very personal and ask you, Leila, do you have a favorite recipe from the book? You have to choose a favorite now.
Well, I love all of these dishes. There's maybe 15 or 16 that I do at my dinners or lunches, and but I would say my favorite, that is my weakness, is fesenjun, and that is it's sort of made with pomegranate molasses and fresh pomegranate juice and ground walnuts. This is the essence of it. And then you can either have it with duck. If my group is smaller, I use duck because it's more difficult to sort of like find good quality in different seasons and all that. And then otherwise I use chicken, and my mom started using eggplant when we had a vegan or vegetarian guest. So I love that sauce very much because it's very tangy, it's very unctuous, and it's very funny because Maria Herrera, who is part of our family and who cooked with my mom and cooks with me, when I say, Maria, we're serving fesenjun tomorrow, and she says, you mean chocolate chicken? Because it's dark brown. So the color of the walnut combined with pomegranate makes it dark brown. And many of my American European guests, when they come, say, "What is that? It looks like a bit weird." But it is, once they taste it, it is really a delicacy and delicious.
Just to chime in, that festinjun is, I think, a dish that every Persian household makes very, very differently. I mean, what Leila June was saying, like there's also, people can make it with like little meatballs. Some people make it sweet, some people make it more tangy, some people have texture to the sauce, some make it very, very smooth. I think even older recipes, they use turkey because it's such a rich sauce because of the walnut. The walnuts have plenty of fat, and so having a lean meat like turkey made sense.
And
The duck would be very indulgent.
Andy, for you, what's your favorite Persian dish? When you go home, what are they making for? They're like, oh, we have to make Andy the.
I'm an easy son. When I go back, it depends. I generally ask for abgusht, which is just because I'm not making abgusht in New York. For those who don't know what that is, it translates to. I mean, if we're being generous, it's like meat broth, but really it's like meat water. That's what it is, and it's lamb shanks. That, I mean, again, I'm sure everybody has variations of this. That gets a little bit of turmeric, browned, black pepper, maybe some turmeric, black pepper, browned, and then cooked with chickpeas, white beans, tomato paste, dried limes, potato, and you cook that until everything's very, very soft. And then you strain that ruby, like deep red, brick-colored liquid that's tangy and fatty, and then you mash up all the solids, and you have this kind of meat, potato, legume paste, the broth. You tear thin, toasted sangak bread, a platter of herbs. This is how it's supposed to be done. And then pickled garlic, which traditionally you're not supposed to eat it until it's aged 7 years. 7 years it's supposed to be, until the skin is almost disappearing and the flesh of the garlic is jammy. It has no bite or spice. It's sweet. And then I think that covers a raw onion. And supposedly, I don't know if this is true. I shouldn't say this. This is more of a question for you. You drink it. Well, I don't need dul with it, but I think some people drink it with dul. But I think before the revolution, people would drink it with mulberry-infused vodka, which makes a lot of sense to me because it's such a fatty dish. You need the assertiveness of the vodka to cut through all of that. So, anyways, that's
Well, and also that dish, our national dish is chelo kebab, but the layman's dish is abgusht. So when you walk in the streets in Iran, everywhere there is a construction, you see number of logs on fire, and there is a pot where the construction people have put a piece of meat, some potatoes, some tomatoes to give it some red color, turmeric, onions, chickpeas, and to the level that they could afford, it could be lamb or veal, or it could be the fat of the sheep, which in Iran, the fat of the sheep is in the tail of the sheep because everywhere is hilly. And so when you buy the lamb, unlike in America or anywhere else that is more flat, the lamb does not have a fatty taste or feeling because all the fat is in the tail. So the fat is cheaper. So the ones who can't afford it put the fat in. And you see that smell in the streets as you walk in different construction sites. So it is the layman's dish. And you put sometimes limu amani, the Omani lemon in it as well. And it's delicious, it's unctuous. Nowadays, we have a section in our book that my dear co-author Leila Heller wrote on the health benefits of all the spices and dishes and spices and teas and oils of our book. And so, it's very good for your gut, that abgush, because it's really elevated bone broth.
Delicious. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we're just beginning to peel back the layers of this onion, and there's so much more there. But I want to open it up to the floor.
Before that, can I
Okay.
say my thank yous to my
Oh my
co-authors?
gosh, of course.
That this book would have not been possible without them. I could leave it for the end if you prefer. But I really want to say this book, oh, sorry, thank you. This book, it took a village to write this book, honestly. My co-authors, Laia, Bahar, and Leila. I mean, first of all, the four of us who were sisters to begin with, they were daughters to my mother. But we all had our own busy professional lives, and all four of us work a lot. So, but this brought us even closer. Sometimes Sundays, my husband would say, again, a 3-hour, 4-hour Zoom call, it's Sunday. I say, but we all work. When are we going to do this? But that was amazing, those Zoom calls, the 4 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours Zoom calls to do our books. We wrote it during COVID. So that brought us all together to write this amazing cookbook. But we also had, and really this wouldn't have been possible. My mom always, Bahar and Leila cooked with my mom. And Laia always, when she would see my mom, say, Naijun, whenever you're ready, I'm ready. I'm going to organize you. I'm going to do all the, she's an amazing organized and perfectionist co-author. And I will do everything for you. Write the resumes, write the, do the, give it to publishers. I'll do all of that. And so don't worry about anything. I'm going to help you publish your book. And every time my mom would see me, she would say, can you imagine Leila, Bahar, and Laia, and Roya would always, Laia's sister, who really also did our menus and was a tester in the book. And so she would say that they are more daughters to me than you are, because you always run away from me when I discuss the cookbook. I said, but Mom, I'm so busy. And she would say, you have to write that cookbook, and they will help you. So at my mom's memorial, a group of us got together, and we were talking about my mom, and Laia said, listen, we need to do this book. And Laia and Bahar and Leila were there, and Roya was there, and we said, we have to do this cookbook. So when my dear friend Susan Hess was having dinner during COVID with a group of friends, and my other friend, Deborah Black, said, oh, I wish Naijun was still alive because I really want to publish a Persian cookbook. And too bad she's gone. I don't know who to go to. When she called me, I said to her, I can't do this alone. We come as a group, and we're going to do. She said, well, we've never had co-authors, and that's not going to happen. I said, well, then I'll introduce you. And I introduced her to several very well-known Persian writers. And so, but she came back and said, no, you've got to do this. And so I said, well, I come with, it's 4 of us at least. So at least, and so anyhow, we had the call with the publisher. And when Laia and Leila and Bahar started talking about Naijun, and stories came flowing, then Jacqueline, Emilia Baraghani said, I think we have a book. So, and she introduced us to Emily Takudas, who was our editor, who was amazing, and then Ella Schwartz became the project manager within our friendship. Le Cinq, we call each other Le Cinq. So that's our WhatsApp heading. And this book, with the help of so many others, and I don't know how to thank them all, came to fruition. Jacqueline, sitting there, wrote all the stories on the feasts and the celebrations. And I want to really thank Fumi, the director of Asia Society, Hamid, who also started the conversation here, and Shane and Neelam and John, who opened the doors to the Asia Society for us to have this amazing book. And really, to all my friends and testers who you know who you are, but if I start talking about each and every one of you, then it will be, and the aunties. The aunties are the best. Mariam June, Suri June, and Faraz June, and Ferishti June. The 4 best friends of my mom, Laya's mom, and Suri June, yeah, I said that. And Laya's and Bahar's mother-in-law, Laya's mother, Leila's mother, and Mariam June, who's here in the audience. They all contributed to the book, and amongst many of our other friends. So it really was a village who wrote this book, not just us.
Appropriate that these recipes are meant to be enjoyed by large groups of loved ones, and that it was written by such a large group of loved ones.
Yes.
Really comes
and
through.
Massumeh, who was my childhood friend, but also my mom's best friend. Every time she would come from Washington, she would come and say, Nahi June, what are we having for dinner? But she was a naughty girl with me when we were teenagers, dancing till 5 o'clock in Key Club and Cheminée. Yeah.
Well, do we still have time for a few questions from the audience? Great. We have one back here.
First, thank you, Leila, Dr. Farhad, and Andy for this dedicated and delicious conversation around Persian fast. I've been mouth-watering throughout the whole time. Growing up from Central and East Asia, I've been exposed to Persian culinaries and chinas that painted with livestock, such as pork, pigs, and cow and other kind. And also learn about the origin of pigs originally from the first ancient domesticated animal from Mesopotamia. I just wonder, we use pork a lot in our recipe and cooking. I just wonder if there any other history that can be tracing back to the use of such animal, and if so, what kind of food that was presented in the ancient Persian fast. And if not, why it was abandoned, and if that's purely because of religious practice or any other reason. Thank you.
To my knowledge, pork was used in Persian food until the Arabs invaded Iran and stayed 400 years. And so then it didn't become a tradition to use so much in Persian foods, although we at home do use it. But it was the reason why it was both banned in Islam and Judaism is because at the time, both these areas, all these areas were where it was very, very hot in the summers, and so that would make pork, sort of be rotted. So that's why even I think that these were banned in these 2 religions is for that very reason. But Massumeh, I think, would have a better maybe explanation for that.
No, I think yes. We know that boar. There was a lot of images of boar hunting in pre-Islamic period, and it was probably used for eating. I'm looking at Andy here. Don't you know?
It's true. We would boar hunt.
Yes.
And we ate the prey.
But with the coming of Islam, as Leila mentioned, boar was no longer part of the diet.
And we have another question here in the front, I saw.
Yes. Thank you for the conversation. I learned a lot. You touched upon the collectivity of people after the food is served. I want to ask about the collectivity during the process of cooking. Like when I grew up in Iran, my grandmother and her neighbors would all buy these very big bags of green beans and sit around the terrace and discuss everything and anything during cutting and washing and preparing it for the whole year. And many important decisions were made. And during that, it was a network of women. It was
And children.
And children, exactly. Thank you. I was there. And I want to ask, as you mentioned, you had a team. You prepared this cookbook as a collective. I want to ask if you also, during the stories and research, came upon these platforms being used by women, by people as a collective power, even political, even, you know.
I grew up that way, just like as you said. So for certain feasts or holidays, or even just like tomatoes, you could only have them in the summer. So it's not like you would have them in the winter, fall, or spring. Or let's say, so we would make tomato paste to last us for an entire year. So I remember when 1,000 tomatoes would arrive in our garden, and these huge vats were brought, and then a fire was made. And then I'm talking about robe anar, which is robe goje, and which is tomato paste, for a very clear reason, because as a 4-year-old, I remember what I did with it. But so anyhow, all day at 5 in the morning, we would all get up, and then this fire would be made, and then we would cook so much tomatoes. And it was my grandmother, my mother, my aunts, all the children, my uncle's children and other uncle's children, and all of us would help to make this tomato paste. And so, and we would be talking, as you said, talking about everything, mostly families and who's where, who's studied, who's getting married, who's engaged, who's in love with who, but also, you know, about politics as well. So anyhow, one of these days, on one such occasion, when this the tomato paste was finished and it became thicker, and then they let it cool in the middle of our kitchen, everybody went to take a nap because it was a very tiring day. It was like probably 4 or 5 o'clock, and I loved our kitchen. It was white and red. Formica had just come out, and so I guess there was an artist in me even then. So I started taking the brushes that you do the kebab with, that you sort of put butter on the kebab when you put them on the mangal, which is the coal barbecue. I took those and I started painting whatever was the white part of the formica with that red sauce. Well, I got a big spanking. Those days, spanking was allowed.
What a great memory. One more question? Yes.
Thanks. This is an obvious question that hasn't been touched on yet. What's the attitude of the Ayatollahs, you know, to food? Are they gourmand or do they eat?
We really don't care. we're allergic to that word.
Well, thank
I'm
you.
sure they also have their elaborate meals, but کوفتشون بشه. I also really want to thank my mother was all my inspiration. I mean, as who I was as a little girl, older girl, as a mother, as a wife, as everything. I couldn't even call her and say, oh, I had a fight with my husband. She would say, I'm not answering. She would hang up. Say, go handle it. You have to learn. You're now married. That's it. Once and for all. So my mom was unbelievable woman, and an inspiration. But another woman who really inspired me was our empress, who gave so many rights to us Iranian women. Education, same rights as any man, opportunities were amazing jobs. I was an economy major I was in middle of my economy, and she told me, what are you studying? I said, well, I'm studying economy and also minoring in art history. What kind of art history? Western art history, not Islamic. And she said, oh, you should go to graduate school. We are building a contemporary museum, and you should come and work with us, because everybody we've hired so far is American. So that's why I studied what I did, and this is where I've ended. But she gave a lot of power to Iranian women. My mother herself, my grandmother would have to sneak her to piano lessons and ballet classes. But she wanted me to have every opportunity. But then during my time, it was allowed and it was encouraged. And my mom said, you're not coming back home until you get a PhD. Well, I guess I disappointed her. I got 2 masters, but no PhD.
Well, so many beautiful stories and recipes from the heart, and so much culture in this book. It's really beautiful. Persian Feasts is just such a triumph. So thank you for sharing this with it. Thank you. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.